Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the phenomenon referred to as the 27 Club. With the recent death of Elvis Presley's grandson, Benjamin Keough, we see once again that the age of 27 appears to be associated with a higher risk of death for celebrities. But is that really the case? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. Now, the idea of the 27 Club, which is sometimes referred to as the Forever 27 Club, is that there's a higher risk of death for musicians and some other types of celebrities at age 27. Of course, throughout history, many people have died at age 27, and some of those people were celebrities. But what really brought this idea to the forefront was the death of 4 27-year-old musicians from 1969 to 1971, namely Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. Later on, we see Kurt Cobain would also die at 27 in 1994, and Amy Winehouse would die in 2011 at age 27. There are many other examples of musicians, actors, and other high-profile figures dying at 27, but the 6 that I listed are really the ones that come to mind for many people. Now, with the case of Benjamin Keough, he was technically a musician, but he really wasn't well known as a musician. He was a celebrity primarily because his grandfather was Elvis Presley. I believe his death could be conceptually linked to the 27 Club because either way he was technically a celebrity. Other than the fact that he ended his own life, we really don't know much about Benjamin Keough, but we do know a lot about the other 6 musicians I mentioned. And I think looking at their deaths gives us some insight into what they may have in common outside of musical talent. Brian Jones drowned on July 3, 1969. Alcohol was likely a contributing factor. He drank heavily for a long time. Jimi Hendrix would die on September 18, 1970 of asphyxiation, but of course we know substances caused that asphyxiation. Janis Joplin would die of a drug overdose on October 4, 1970. Jim Morrison died exactly 2 years after the death of Brian Jones, on July 3, 1971. His death was recorded as heart failure, but it's likely that heroin use was a major contributing factor. Kurt Cobain would end his own life on April 5, 1994. It seems fairly clear that alcohol was a major contributor to that, and Amy Winehouse would die from alcohol poisoning on July 23, 2011. The common thread with these 6 musicians is substance use. They used substances for a long time, and they used them excessively. So this leaves us with the question, is the 27 Club a real phenomenon? Or are people just more aware of this idea, therefore they emphasize cases where somebody dies at age 27? We see one study in 2011 that attempted to answer this question. It was focused on musicians who had a #1 album on the UK charts. The final sample was over 1,000 musicians, 71 of whom had died. When looking at the results of the study, we see an increased risk of musicians dying in their 20s and 30s, but no special observations were made statistically around the age of 27. That is, there was not a large number of deaths at 27 compared to other ages. For example, the ages of 25 and 32 stood out about as much as age 27. Musicians' risk of death between 20 and 40 was about 3 times higher than someone in the general population. So if there is no statistical reason for this club to exist, why is it a concept? I think what happened here is that people noticed those 4 deaths I talked about between 1969 and 1971, and after that, people really started paying attention when a celebrity died at age 27. I think it's similar to the concept of people believing that bad things happen in sets of 3. Everything happens in a set of 3 if one waits long enough. I think people pick the number 3 because it's the first number whereby if something happens that many times, it no longer seems like a coincidence. I think the 27 Club is really about people finding patterns and trying to make sense of tragedy. One additional possibility, given the self-destructive nature of many of these musicians, selection bias becomes a concern. Could it be that they saw other people dying at age 27 and they felt destined to do this as well? So they think, I don't really have a choice, I might as well be reckless, and in essence they could have caused or greatly contributed to their own deaths. So whenever we see one number kind of stand out like that, even if it's not statistically significant, selection bias is something to think about. This wasn't necessarily a situation where something was happening to these people. They had an active part, much of the time, in causing their death. So we do have to wonder if they might have been self-selecting to some degree into that population. So what can we learn about this phenomenon other than a little bit about statistics? I think the bottom line here is that fame is not really good for people. There are several reasons that fame and substance use are connected. I will list 6 of them here. The first one, the stress of being famous, going on tour, of having to produce albums, can be too much for people. So they turn to alcohol and drugs to alleviate that pain, albeit, of course, temporarily and with massive, terrible consequences. Reason 2, the access to wealth can be too much to handle. Maybe the individual was predisposed to substance use, but they never had the money or the time to start using heavily. Item number 3, substance use is part of the culture of the music industry. It's really glorified in that context. The idea that life should be an endless pleasure cruise, an incredible party, living to the maximum, living life to the extreme, all those are actually fairly dangerous constructs. And again, they're very wrapped in to the music industry. Item number 4, for some musicians and celebrities in general, I think what happens is they work hard to be famous, to be successful, and when they achieve it, everything in their life changes. They look around at all the people they've known who had a lot of talent, but were not successful, and they start to feel like a fraud. It's like a version of imposter syndrome, except for musicians instead of academics. They turn to substances to take away that pain, to take away that feeling of being a phony. Item number 5, when someone works hard to reach a goal, it can be quite anticlimactic when they finally acquire it. To be famous, at least initially, must feel pretty amazing. To have wealth and power, to hang out with so-called high-status people, to have achieved what few people are able to do. But then there's this sense of what else is in store, right? Is there anything beyond fame and power and wealth? What else can somebody achieve? There becomes a point where there's nowhere left to go. They've been on this rocket ride, increasing in success, but then they just level out. Every month was better than the prior month, or at least every year was better than the prior year, but now they've leveled off. How can they satisfy their excitement seeking? How can they find a new sense of purpose? Often, they turn to substances. The last way that fame and substance use are connected is that those who have the ability to become famous musicians and the drive to follow through with it are often depressed. Depression can be a motivation for the pursuit of a career based on fame, and it could also, of course, lead to substance use. So it could be that life as a famous musician was the substance. And when that didn't work, when that didn't do the trick, they turned to chemical substances. So really here, life as a musician and substances essentially fulfill the same goal, but somebody eventually needs more, so they add substances on. Considering these items and everything else I talked about, it does appear that self-destructiveness is really a theme in the music world. When looking at many of the musician deaths that occur at 27 and at other young ages, we see that even in instances where a substance caused the death technically, it is strongly suspected that many of them really wanted to end their life, or they were so reckless that they knew that death was likely to occur. There's been research on how there are differences in the lyrics produced by self-destructive and non-self-destructive musicians. When comparing the groups, we see that those who were self-destructive produced lyrics that were more immediate, emotional, and self-focused. Interestingly, they also wrote more narratively. So again, we see this pattern where maybe depression causes musicians, at least to some degree, and then depression in that context also leads to substance use. Unfortunately, with the amount of stress in that world, everything gets magnified, everything gets taken to an extreme. Death is the result more often than we would expect to see in the general population. So really kind of a sad and unfortunate cycle that people get caught in. A lot of times I think when looking at celebrities, people think, well, celebrities have everything. They have it made. Again, they have the wealth and the power and all those things. How can they end up being so self-destructive? So it makes sense to believe that perhaps that self-destructiveness, to some degree, existed before they were a celebrity. Not in all cases, but I think this does happen. So those are my thoughts on the 27 Club. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.